Roger and Sarah Bansemer are right at home as they give viewers a glimpse of their unique Alligator Creek studio in Clearwater, Florida. Get your paints out and prepare to get your feet wet on the next episode of Painting and Travel.
Oh, made it. Oh, isn't it beautiful down here? Boy, now that I'm down here in the water, I think this is a really good idea. I've done this on several occasions in the past, and anywhere else this would seem adventurous, but my studio is not more than 15 feet away, if that. Right here, this is what I look down on every day when I paint my studio. So this will just be a nice relaxing time, and I'll just make a quick little study here, this little waterfall. Well, now that I've gotten all set up here in Alligator Creek, hopefully there won't be any alligators swimming by. I have seen a few in this creek in years gone by, but not for quite a while. There is an otter or two that frequents this creek occasionally. I do see them. They're always a joy to watch. We have ducks and other wildlife down in here, lots of raccoons. We used to have fox as well, but they've sort of disappeared through the years as development has continued through this area. So I'll paint this while it's still beautiful. I brought a few brushes with me down here, 3 or 4 flats or brights as they are called. I brought a couple of fan brushes. One is a new fan brush, one is a bit of a ragged fan brush. It's good for doing weeds and things like that. And I brought one round, which is a very nice pointed brush for doing some details. I'll get my paints out here. I'll get some titanium white, cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, a little bit of phthalo blue, got some burnt umber, some burnt sienna. Burnt sienna mixed with phthalo blue make a very beautiful dark green. That's primarily the reason I have the phthalo blue out here. Then I'll put yellow ochre. So I have my 3 earth colors: burnt umber, burnt sienna, and yellow ochre. Raw umber is so close to burnt umber that I don't bother to put both of those out. Burnt umber is a little warmer. Raw umber is a little bit cooler. Frankly, I can't see that much difference. I have my little atomizer here, a little spray bottle. Keeps things a little bit wet, keeps them from drying out quite so quickly, as these are all acrylics. And I have some water and water. I love that. Before the light changes any further, I'll take a few photographs with my digital camera, which is something I always bring with me. And I'll take a few pictures here. That way, when the light changes, I'll still have some good reference material for when I finish this painting up in the studio. I think I'll spray my board here a little bit. What I'm using is a 11 by 14 inch piece of masonite covered with gesso. I use an 11 by 14 inch side because it's a standard size, so it can easily fit in a frame. I'll mix up some burnt umber and ultramarine blue. And I'll start doing a little drawing here. I've lived here for about 25 years or more. People have often asked me if I've painted this railroad trestle. I love trains, and I have on occasion, but never down here in the creek. So this is a first for me. And I'll just play with the composition here some. I think I want to feature these rocks and stones here, this little waterfall down here, more so than this trestle. I may even not include this trestle at all as I think about this composition as it grows. Maybe I'll just give a little indication of the bottom of that trestle. There's some beautiful negative areas over in that trestle where those dark posts come down into the water. There's still some sunlight over there, and there's some bright greens coming through there that are quite pretty. Got a big dark area here of some trees. Those are Brazilian peppers. It's not a native plant to Florida. It's considered a nuisance plant. But there they are. They do look quite lovely for our purposes. I often include an S-curve in my paintings to bring my eye into the painting, and here I can see one as well. It's naturally occurring. I have the water back here under the trestle. It comes around here, comes down here, and it flows, comes out this way. It looks pretty confusing at this point, but this is how I just start out with just some loose drawings just to establish my composition. If I have a good composition, lots of other parts of it will fall in place naturally. If I have a bad composition, it's really hard to get over that no matter how good the painting is. I think I will have all my rocks right in this area here. I'm going to establish my darks. I like to work from dark to light on my painting, so I just want to block these in very quickly. Here, I'll take some ultramarine blue, add a little bit of yellow ochre to it. That'll give me a little bit of a green color, but still very dark and very neutral. Trying to get my basic shapes established. First my drawing with a few brush strokes, a few lines, and then my lights and my darks established. Here we have this green plant over here. I'll add a little yellow ochre just so I just know what that is. A little green. And in the back here I have another set of green coming down here. When I look at this scene here, I'm always squinting my eyes and looking. What it does is it takes all these complex shapes and sort of simplifies them into big areas for me. So I'm constantly looking and squinting my eyes at this. I'll indicate a few of these posts from this railroad trestle here. This was going to be the railroad track here, but I think I'm going to raise that whole thing up. I think I'll push that up and just have the posts down in here. People can guess what it is. It doesn't really matter. It's just a shape. I don't have to really describe everything I paint here. It will probably be fairly obvious, but I'm still only using a few colors, ultramarine blue and burnt umber primarily. Since there is so much green on this, I think I'll put out a few greens right now, maybe just one or two. I'll put out sap green, and this is going to be one of my favorites, chromium oxide green. It's a very opaque color. And then I think I'll put out some cadmium yellow light. Just block this in here. That's just going to indicate my water for right now. It looks awfully dark at this point, this painting does, but I like to work from darks to lights, because when I put my whites and my lighter colors over this, I'll have a nice dark base, and some of this can show through. My highlights are what's going to make this painting attractive, so I have to keep everything else dark for those highlights to show up. I've lost a lot of my drawing that I originally put on there. That was just for my benefit. It wasn't meant to be anything finished in that. It just gives me a sort of a roadmap as to where I want to go, and I can still feel this S-curve in here. Sometimes when it rains real hard, this creek rises a great deal. I would be underwater actually in a good heavy rain. These have already dried up on me. I carry a razor blade in a little box here, so I can scrape these old paints off. It's like I need a new razor blade, but I can scrape those off, put them in the box so I don't leave any trash behind. Now I'm just gonna put a little wash of green in here, indicating that bright sunlight on the other side of the railroad trestle. I hear a train down the way there. It may be coming by here before I finish. This light is changing all the time, and now I see some beautiful highlights on these rocks over here. Take a little cerulean blue, a little burnt umber, a little bit of white. Still keeping this in the gray areas. I'll start to indicate a few of these rocks in here. So lights over darks, that's sort of what does it for me. I can build up these rocks here, and I can have these dark areas still in those rocks. It's easier to put the lights over the darks and let these dark areas remain in the background. I want to try and be aware of all the different shapes of these rocks. They're not all the same size or the same color or the same texture. They're all different. The light's hitting them all differently too. This will be my center of interest here, so I want to concentrate on this probably more than any other part of the canvas. Oh, I'm hoping I can catch some of that beautiful light that's coming over those rocks right now. Take a smaller flat brush, some yellow ochre and white. I'm just going to try and indicate a few of those highlights. I have so limited time right here because the light's going to change and so on. I don't intend to finish this painting down here, but what I want to do is just make some quick notes to myself. I can learn a lot more by being down here than I can from just snapping a photograph. Just sitting here in nature, you feel a little bit more a part of that. I think that translates more into a good painting when I finish it later on. Not always, but this is all a learning experience. So I see some beautiful highlights coming across that one rock there, and that will disappear very quickly, I'm sure. So I'll just try and give myself a little remembrance of what that is from these colors here. And there's some beautiful algae growing on this rock down here. So I'll show a little bit of that too. I think I'll make this a little bit darker down here. This water, a little bit more ultramarine blue and burnt umber. This is very dark down in here. But I do have some reflections coming in at this area here. But I want to put those lights over the darks. These paints here, these are all dry, and it's just been a couple of minutes. Acrylics have the advantage and the disadvantage of drying quickly. Put a little bit of white in here, a little more cadmium yellow light, and maybe just indicate the tops of those weeds. The bottom of these weeds in here, they still look fairly dark. I think I'll take a little bit of dark green, maybe some phthalo blue and some green here. Just make that dark green down in there. Oh, I hear the train coming now. Well, that's fun. I've always loved trains. There goes the duck, just flew overhead too. I'll just take a little break from the painting and show you my railroad caboose. As I said, I love trains. Right over here is our house, And in this larger 3-story building is my studio. This is an antique. It was built in 1925, and it originally ran on the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad. And I brought it back here to Clearwater and restored it and put Atlantic coastline on the side. That's my favorite line. So let's go inside for just a moment and I'll show you around. I keep a few of my toys in here that I had when I was a young boy. This was my very first train set. And over here are a few more childhood toys along with a collection of railroad lanterns. This is an old caboose lantern, and it had a mechanism here with springs and such to take up the shock during a rough ride. So that's a few of the things in this old caboose. Just wanted to show you before we get back to the painting. Ooh, this is a good place to sit and have some coffee. So that's my railroad caboose. Now we'll just get back down to the creek and continue on with that painting. When the sunlight shines through an object like a big leaf or a weed, it becomes much more brilliant than just the light shining on the weed. I see a good example of that here right now on those big, these are Mexican sunflowers coming into the water. There's no flowers on them now, but these big leaves, the sun is coming through them, make a very brilliant green. I see the light has changed a lot on these dark railroad trestles. I have a beautiful burnt sienna look on that light on the post. I'll mix up a little burnt sienna and put an indication of those highlights there. Put another highlight over here. A little cross beam would be going across here. I can barely see this myself, these lines, but I can see them just enough to give me an idea of where to place the negative areas. I still have some of this beautiful light coming across the water. I'll spray my board. This paint is already dry, but by spraying this paint flows on a little bit more easily, and it will run just enough to where this edge gets soft. And I'll take this old fan brush, indicate a few more of the leaves that are coming over here. I'm going to finish this up in the field now by adding a few little details as to how this water is running down through these rocks. That's the focus of the entire painting. So I want to give myself some indications of how that looks. A lot of times I look at these colors and it's hard to really say what color it is. Is it blue or is it green or is it... Sometimes it's so vague. So the question I ask myself is, first of all, is this a cool color or is this a warm color? And that's pretty much the case with this water coming through here. It's definitely not a warm color, so I'm going to mix up to a little cerulean blue and a little white. That'll give me a cool color. I'll spray this a little more. That'll give me that soft edge. And I might just take my brush and splatter this as well. And when that dries for just a minute, I'll take a dry brush and soften this. So I'll just indicate some of this rippling water down here. I'll just pick a little bit of that up with a dry brush. Make it softer. A few more highlights over here with the sun's reflecting on the bottom of the creek. haven't used my pointed brush for details yet because I don't really have many details in here. And I'll just add a few now. What I can do here is define these rocks a little more carefully. I'm just going to use some pure white here and put in a few little details of the water coming over those rocks. It's these small details that will bring the painting to life, but without having established all these rich darks in here to begin with, these highlights wouldn't happen, they wouldn't exist. You can't paint light over light. All these darks have given me the opportunity to put in these nice highlights. I seem to have lost my little S pattern right now, but I can bring that back. Well, I think that's about all I'm going to do on this painting right now. We'll take this back up into the studio and finish it, but I came down here and I've accomplished what I set out to do, and that's get a good composition with lights and darks. I got my drawing in here. I got a little indication of what details I want to focus on. Took some pictures, and we'll just take it up to the studio there and put a few more touches on it and see if I can finish this up. Now that I'm back in the studio, I've had some time to download all my digital photographs to the computer, and rather than print my photographs out on photo paper to use as reference, I keep the photos on the computer and I put them up here on my monitor. What this allows me to do is see all my individual photos, and if I click on them, I can see them full screen. I can also zoom in, zoom out, and I can move around here. So that way I can get a lot more detail, a lot more clarity by viewing these on the monitor rather than on a printed page. So now I guess I'll get started with trying to finish this painting. Since I'm using acrylic paints, even in the studio, these dry very quickly. So I keep a larger atomizer up here, and occasionally I spray these to keep them a little damp. If I have to leave my studio for some time, I've created a little box. It has a little plastic top on it and wooden sides, but it could be a pie pan or anything. As long as it sets on this surface fairly tightly, I just spray the bottom of this, spray my paints, and I can set this box over the top of this. This will keep these paints wet for hours and hours, and sometimes even overnight. I need to work on the details of this painting. I've blocked in all of my large areas, so what I need to do in finishing this up is add some of those nice touches. I think I'll start by putting in a few more dark areas back in here. I've darkened this water even more because I can see from my photograph, even more than I can see when I was out in the field there, how much these lights are reflecting in the water. In order to keep those looking as bright as I can, this needs to be as dark as it can to give me that contrast. So now I'll start working on some of this water coming over the rocks. And if I think these edges are a little bit too hard, I can just take a dry brush while these are still wet, just drag it lightly over the top here. Soften those edges just a little bit. You have to be quick though because acrylics dry so fast. There's a lot of reflected light coming up into these rocks here, so I'm going to indicate some of that in these rocks down here. Use a little cerulean blue. There are some leaves and debris that float down in the creek, and they get stuck between these rocks. I might put a little bit of those in there. It adds a little bit of color. All these rocks along the top seem all about the same color and values. They're different shapes, so that's good, but I think I'll change the color and value on some of these to give a little more interest to it. Using a pointed brush now, putting in a little detail on these rocks with some ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Where the water comes over these rocks, I get a nice highlight. So I'm going to use some pure white, quite sparingly. And that'll probably be the brightest thing in my painting. There's a lot of bubbles where this waterfall ends here. So I'm taking this old beat up stiff brush, putting some very thin white paint on there, and I'm going to splatter this just a little bit. Splattering can be very gimmicky if you're not careful, so I use this very sparingly. I obviously have too much on there, so I'll take a dry brush and I can lift some of this out. I've gone ahead and I've finished this painting up. I've made a number of changes. Many times when I start a painting, I have a pretty clear vision of what it's going to be when I finish. This was not the case, though. I made a lot of changes along the way that I really didn't expect to make. This railroad trestle seemed awfully dark, so I lightened this. It almost gave it a little bit of atmosphere back here. It was jumping out too forward in the painting, so I softened all this. The focus of attention, of course, is this little waterfall, so I decided to add more rocks to this area. And then I simplified this area, added some of these little Mexican sunflowers in here, making sure not to make them too bright. I didn't want them to jump out too much. And then I added the little otter down here, which I've seen in the creek frequently. So now all that remains to do to this painting is sign it, varnish it, and I'll put it in a frame. I'll see what it looks like.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.